I want to thank you. I want to thank all of you beautiful, fascinating people, and that's all of you. I want to thank you for being you, for being here, what you're involved in your life, for letting me rub shoulders with you, hearts and spirits. It has just been a great delight for me. So just thank you. And tonight, well, first of all, I've been a lifelong follower of Jesus. Jesus has shaped my life and changed my life and keeps changing it. And when I say I'm a lifelong follower of Jesus, I know the word Jesus brings up lots of different feelings for different people. And I'm here to say that no one is more brokenhearted than Jesus about all the spiritual abuse that has been done in the world in his name. When I found, or Integral found me 15 years ago, it opened up my path of following Jesus in profound new ways. And I decided then to devote the rest of my life, the last third of my life, to looking at the intersection between Integral and Christianity, because it's so rich. And in my experience, it opened up my thinking and my spiritual experiences in new and wonderful ways. And so I delighted in sharing that with my congregation. Interestingly enough, Friday night I told you about all the people that left and all the changes. The last 10 years, my congregation moved from postmodern to Integral. Nobody left. When I left, the church declared themselves an integral church. I got a kick out of one of our members. She came up to me and said, "You know, Paul, whenever I fill out a form that says, 'What's your religion?' I put down Integral Christian." So, but when people are ready, they're ready, and so that has been wonderful. So, the first. We're going to use these images here a great deal, and so if we could turn the lights down. And are you ready to go? Yeah. Here we go. When David contacted me, he asked me to talk about the question, what is my relationship to Jesus now? And that is a great topic, closest to my heart. It's the heart of Christianity, and I was delighted to accept his invitation. Now, a word about how I communicate. The rational is communicated with words and concepts. The spiritual is best communicated with symbols and images. Here's an image called the spiritual person. And looking at this image, notice how you can move from your head to your heart and your spirit. And I've chosen tonight a lot of images, and I've chosen them very carefully. And I think they are psycho-spiritually active images. You don't have to understand them with your head. You don't have to remember them. But I believe if you will let them in and let them embrace you, they will have the potential for changing us. They have changed me. Jesus didn't have PowerPoint. And instead, he told stories. So he painted graphic images, and that was his way of doing it. And so I'd like you to hear my words and concepts with the discerning eye of your mind. When I'm saying and talking about something, you get to discern it. Well, that doesn't sound right. Well, that does sound pretty true. I don't know about that. I have to ask him about that. But when it comes to the images, move from the eye of your mind to the eye of your spirit and heart and feel what connects there. And when I finish with my words and images, we'll take time for questions and comments. and then we'll have a guided prayer and meditation experience at the end to try out in practice, for the brave ones, what I've shared. To introduce my answer to David's question, let's begin with a history of Christianity in 10 seconds. Yeah, here we go. Christianity began in Palestine as an experience. It moved to Greece and became a philosophy. It shifted to Italy and became an institution. It arrived in Europe and became a culture. It came to America and became a business. You got that, boy, you got that. I tell you. We all felt that, didn't we? Yeah. Well, I began by saying that Christianity began as an experience in Palestine. What was this experience? I understand that it was the transforming friendship that Jesus had with a few others. He summed it up in his famous words to his first followers, "I no longer call you servants, but I call you friends." While neglected by some, other modern teachers continued to advocate various forms of friendship with Jesus. Leslie Weatherhead was a liberal Protestant English pastor and theologian from the early 20th century. He wrote about how complicated Christianity must seem to many people. His answer to that perception was this: I think the essence of the matter might be stated by saying that Christianity is the acceptance of the gift of the friendship of Jesus. Marcus Borg was the eminent postmodern Jesus scholar who recently passed away. I loved him. He says, being a Christian isn't primarily about having a correct theology by getting our beliefs right. It is about a deepening relationship with God as known especially in Jesus. Richard Rohr is a friend and a Franciscan priest, inspiring writer. He says, the non-dual paradox and mystery was for Christians a living person, an icon we could gaze upon and fall in love with. So my answer to David's question, what is my relationship to Jesus now? It's simply, Jesus is my transforming friend. And so I call my topic this evening, a transforming friendship with Jesus. There are two parts. The first part is about putting friendship with Jesus into an integral framework. I have found that if I don't put me talking about friendship with Jesus into an integral framework for postmodern and integral folks, they understandably tend to dismiss what I say about Jesus because it sounds to them like a Baptist preacher talking about that old personal relationship with Jesus stuff, you know? So we'll just turn that off. Now, you're too smart to do that, but just in case, I'm going to put it in the integral context, okay? Because I love to do that. They fit together so wonderfully. And the second part is the practice. A look at the New Testament portrayal of friendship with Jesus and how today one might go about the practice of a transforming friendship with Jesus in what I call sitting with Jesus. I got that from the Buddhists. If they can sit with Buddha, I can sit with Jesus, and I just love it. Wow. First, the integral context, okay? The traditional classic picture of God is imaged something like this: God the Father, God the Son, God the Spirit. I was doing an integral Christianity workshop in Las Vegas when one gentleman came up to me before I started, and he had heard I was going to say something about the Trinity. And he pointed his finger at me and in an incredulous voice said, "Are you really going to tell us that God is two men and a bird?" I laughed and said, "Well, but you put it like that, I guess it does sound a little strange." Behind his humor was a serious question. Isn't God more than what those three words, Father, Son, and Spirit, communicate? Yes, I found there is more, much more, and in the next 15 minutes, I want to build a picture of God that is both Christian and integral, both faithful to the Bible and our experience, and is also in some kind of hopefully communicable form. Here it goes. I consider what Ken calls the three faces of Spirit or God, to be the greatest breakthrough in understanding and accessing God for Christians since the Trinity was formulated in the 4th century. When he and I talked on the phone the first time, and he read that, he said to me, "Thank you." And I said, "I mean it. It has changed my understanding of God and given me all kinds of permissions I didn't have before, which we'll talk about tonight." Everyone knows how Ken arrived at the three faces of God. He began with a condensed version of the 4 quadrants called the Big Three. We all know these 3 basic perspectives. They're a way of viewing any situation seen in all modern languages: first person, second person, third person. When I talk to my congregation about this, I use little pictures that are much too unsophisticated for this group, but here they are anyway. Third person is talking about something or someone. Second person is talking to something or someone. This is straight out of my theology class in seminary, isn't it? Yeah. And first person is talking as something or someone. You get that? Yeah. Okay, that says it. A picture says a lot of things. Or we could say about is its space, and to is we space, and as is I space. From that we get the idea of the three faces of Spirit or God. In simplest form, the it space is talking about God, the we space is talking to God, and the I space is talking as God. When I first got the three faces of God here into my head, I realized this was also an amazing picture of Jesus. Jesus talked about God. He talked about your father, mother. Usually I translate father, pater in Greek, as father, mother, and I'll tell you why. And that's because father, the word father in Jesus' day, was the corporate personality of the family, and it included mother in a way that's not true today. Husbands, if you say I speak for my wife, you'll hear about that right away, okay? He talked about this fatherly, motherly God a lot. Jesus talked to God, personally using the name Abba, that both children and adults use as a term of endearment, meaning daddy or papa. And he got away to pray often. And Jesus talked as God. He said, God and I are one. Speaking from his inner spiritual identity, he said, if you've seen me, you've seen God. He spoke as the great I am. Before Abraham was, I am. Within 10 or 20 years of his crucifixion, most of the early Christian groups had fully incorporated worshiping both God and Jesus as a part of their regular spiritual practice. By the way, I'm glad to see that Ken has adopted this simple statement that Jesus talked about God and to God as God, which first appeared in my book back in 2011. I'm not bragging or anything. One year I did win a medal for being the most humble, but they took it away from me when I wore it. So. Well, let's refine this picture a little more, because Jesus did more than talk. Boy, did he did a lot more than talk. Let's say Jesus reflected about God in ordinary or gross awareness. He related to God in subtle awareness, or what I call prayer. He rested as God in causal and witness awareness, or what I call meditation. I agree with Marcus Borg that Jesus learned how to meditate from the mystics of many traditions that passed through the cosmopolitan city of Sepphoris. Sepphoris was 4 miles away from where Jesus grew up in Nazareth. It's highly likely that Jesus and his brothers and father, for a while at least, made that 4-mile walk back and forth to do handwork, construction work, and stonework at Sepphoris, which was being rebuilt as a Roman cosmopolitan city. Incredible place where people from all over the world came. As you may have noticed, I make a rather clear distinction between prayer and meditation. They're both important. They're each portals to different states, different experiences, and have different effects in our lives. In Christian groups that don't use integral jargon, I actually call the subtle state prayer consciousness. And I call the causal state I am consciousness, or I'm working on something that's even more communicable to traditional Christians in that. This is an important picture in my understanding, so let me repeat it. Jesus reflected about God in ordinary consciousness. He related to God in prayer or subtle prayer consciousness, and he rested as God in causal I am, witness, and meditation. So we have Jesus' three state practices. Do you see that? Jesus' three state practices. Okay. This picture can also frame our three state practices as Christians. We reflect about God. Thinking is a sacred activity. It's the way we love God with our minds. We relate to God. Relating to God is not a belief, but an experience, a relationship with God. We rest as God. First person spiritual practice focuses on resting as God in meditation. This is the experience of union and identification with God. So we have our three state practices. One final piece about how we talk about the three faces of God. For me, calling them the first, second, and third faces of God, and the it space and the we space and I space of God, is just a little clinical and mathematical for me. So, let me suggest another way, and there are many ways. Here's one I found very helpful to me and my congregation. When we talk and think and reflect about God, we don't want to think small. Talking and thinking about God is map making. And any map of God must be a big map, a cosmic map, an infinite map. So when we talk about God, we want to be able to talk about a really, really big cosmic God. So let's say, at least for tonight, we reflect about the infinite face of God. In the we space, we relate to God. Not in map terms, not in concepts or abstractions, but personally, in relational and intimate ways. So let's say we relate to the intimate face of God. And in the I space, we rest as God. This is our inner identification with God. So let's try this. We rest as the inner face of God. Now we have expanded the traditional Trinity, put it into an integral framework, added spiritual practices, and we have what I call the expanded Trinity. Look it over just a minute and reflect, see if it connects with anything in your own experience or in your heart. One last integral part. I ask this question. Where do these integral terms fit in Christianity? Ideas of I amness, pure being, non-duality, unity consciousness, deity forms of the beloved, all states of consciousness, ordinary, subtle, causal, the witness, non-dual, the true self, the unique self. Where do they all fit in? Well, they fit in gorgeously. We started with these three simple spaces, which we might audaciously call the integral Trinity, okay? What happens when we look through the lens of the integral Trinity, the it space, the we space, and the I space, and we look at the traditional Trinity? What do we see? What do we find out? What do we discover? When I looked through integral glasses, I saw Jesus and the early Christians come alive for me in totally new ways. And I would give you just a glimpse of how the integral approach radically opens up Christian understanding and experience for today's spiritual seeker. It clears away theological cobwebs and points to actual experience. I'm going to show you a series of 9 images with very brief explanations. This will be a whirlwind tour, no time to elaborate, as I will in my next book. I welcome questions. Hint. I will welcome questions later, and also I have a handout that has these images and everything I'm going to talk about on the front and back. Okay, you ready? Here we go. Ready? Okay. I asked myself, where do these three spaces of Father, Son, and Spirit of the early Christians fit in most with the early Christian Trinity? In the integral framework, I saw the traditional Trinity was very noticeably a we space. These were relationships. The early Christians didn't sit around and say, let's think of some theological terms. We're going to have the Trinity coming up, and we're going to need to have some theology terms. They didn't do that at all. They started off, they were around Jesus, who kept talking about Abba, his daddy, his father, his papa. And then they were around Jesus so much, and pretty soon he began to feel like God in person, and that was something for a Jewish person. And so they began experiencing Jesus as a way to relate to God. And spirit was this power, this energy, something or other that came. And so these were relationships. So let's put them there. We'll return to them in a minute. But how about our it space and our I space? Well, I had to put the traditional Trinity in those two spaces too, because in integral understanding, everything must be seen from all three places. We have to see the Trinity from all three spaces. This is my basic template, and I was amazed at what I found. Let's begin with the big, infinite it picture of God. And I asked myself, what's behind Father in the it space? What's the big picture of Father? When Jesus was talking about his Father, what was behind that? What was behind this personal face of God for Jesus? Here's what I found. Behind the Father for Jesus was the awesome God revealed to Moses as I am. It was one of the most important passages for every Jewish child and adult in Jesus' day. It was this. God said, I am that I am. Say that I am has sent you. That is my name forever. I cleverly paid Ken to talk about that earlier, okay, to set this up. That's what was behind that. And this was an astounding statement. This was a really deep statement. And I thought to myself, how can I symbolize the great I am? What symbol might represent the spiritual reality? And I found one that was helpful for me. It is infinite space, a metaphor for the life, love, and light of infinite being. Now, all symbols have limitations. This one communicates the vast, infinite spaciousness of I amness. When we're in I amness consciousness, there aren't any boundaries. It's vast and spacious. What it does not communicate is that I amness is empty space. And it's very difficult to have a picture of nothing, so I gave up trying, okay, to do that. But just realize this is vast space, but it's empty space. Take it a moment, though, and see if this could connect with that vast inside space in you. The I am space. And I decided to call this the infinite face of God. I am infinite being. Then I asked, what's behind the Son in the infinite it space? What's the big picture of God behind Jesus? Here was Jesus, but was there something bigger behind Jesus? Well, Jesus was given the title of the Anointed One, or the Christ in Greek. At first, this was used to mean that he was the Messiah. But it didn't stay that way. It changed. This is very confusing to many Christians because they use the term Jesus and Christ interchangeably, and they're not. They're connected, but not interchangeably. So it changed from Jesus to the Messiah, and after the resurrection, the title Christ came to mean something much bigger. This larger understanding of the Christ has been called many things. One of the things it's been called is the cosmic Christ. Christ is the Christian symbol for the whole of reality. I'd like you to remember that. That's the way I think of Christ. Christ is that term is a symbol, and it's the Christian symbol for the whole of reality. One of my favorite theologians, Ramon Panikkar, is the one I got that definition from. Ramon Panikkar is the one who said, I left for Europe as a Christian. I became a Hindu and then a Buddhist without ever ceasing to be a Christian. I love him. He's got a lot of things together. So, then I asked myself, what is behind spirit in the infinite it space? What's the big picture of spirit? And I found the big picture is cosmic consciousness, one consciousness, universal consciousness. Spirit is infinite consciousness. When the word consciousness is in the Bible always about spirit. If you look every place in the Old and New Testament, you see the word spirit. They didn't have the word consciousness before the 1800s. It's about consciousness. That's what it's about. Let's put that in the infinite face of God. Next I ask, what is beyond God the Father, Son, and Spirit in the we space? Then I remembered, it's not a what, it's a who. This is the place of relationships, not ideas and concepts and whats and theologies and doctrines and so on. This is not map making, this is the territory. And I saw that this spiritual we space is now accessed here, in the subtle realm of non-physical entities and images. This subtle space is the in-between space between the physical and the formless. It's an in-between space. It's not a belief system like the infinite face of God. It's a realization. It's experience. I hope you're familiar with this space. It's moving and it's alive with energy. Here is found the risen Jesus as a deity form, who is now accessed as a subtle level embodied non-physical entity. He is a felt, experienced presence here. Behind Father in the we space is the personal presence of God. Here is God as addressed in prayer, given the surprising new name by Jesus of Abba, the motherly, fatherly presence of God. And then there's Spirit alongside of us in personalized form, called various names in the Bible. Teacher, guide, advocate, comforter. Let's use this one, Spirit as helper. And of course there are other deity forms that Christians have found meaningful, such as Mary. Our Catholic brothers and sisters on their own embraced and cut a cosmic groove with Mary as a motherly presence of God, because the hierarchy steadfastly refused to provide that presence in their imaging and language about God and in the priesthood. So the average common folk came up with that, and who appeared to them in visions. What a wonderful thing. And in our plus sign category, let's add other meaningful personal forms. There's great diversity here in other traditions and in the Christian tradition. Let's put this in the intimate we space, the intimate face of God. Last of all is the inner I space. As I grew in my own internal experiences, I found the I space is also not a belief system. It's a series of realizations. The I space is all about the energy of consciousness. And I asked myself when I looked at this I space, what's behind Father in this space? What is this about behind Father? And I discovered behind Father is the I amness as causal and witness consciousness. Like I say, we won't have time to talk about it, but believe me, that's where it is, and that's why it's so important. And of course, I couldn't see this until I began experiencing it myself, and then it was all over. It was all over the Old and New Testament. It popped out. Let's focus on the witness consciousness and its crucial role. Behind Father in I space is the witness. The witness. Ken talked about that, didn't he, this afternoon? The Spirit bears witness with our spirit that we are children of God. How do we know we're God's children? How do we know we're divine? Well, I read it in a book. No. Because it's in our hearts. And the Spirit tells us that. The witness is our true self. I hunted for a metaphor, an image for the witness, and this one resonated with me. The witness is the still place from where we watch an ever-changing cosmos. Take a moment. Let yourself move into that vast inner spaciousness. Witness consciousness is crucial. It's where we look from this peaceful, vast place at all the things going on around us without identifying with them. And let's put this inside of us, because that's where it is. It's in you. It's in you. The whole cosmos is in you. And also in you and me is the witness, peacefully, calmly looking at it all and observing it as it all arises. And let's put this into the I space and call it the interface of God. Now I ask myself, in my experience and biblical understanding, what's behind the Son in integral space? I ask, what's the reality of Jesus inside of me? I found Christ as unity love consciousness, the whole of reality and inseparable oneness. Paul says, I live, not I, but Christ lives in me. What's Christ? Christ is the whole of reality without division, without separating. Ken talked about it beautifully this afternoon. By the way, I did all this 2 months ago, okay? I didn't know what he was going to talk about today. But here, Christ, when we say Christ lives in me, Jesus lives there too, but that's what it's talking about. It's talking about the whole of reality in total, complete oneness and love. Wow. Inside of you and me. Wow. Oh. All of reality lives in us. And so I put this in the interface of God as non-dual consciousness. Finally, I asked myself, last picture, what's behind the spirit in the I space? Spirit. What's behind that? Spirit is always about consciousness, as I said. I read about people being filled with the Spirit in the New Testament. What did that mean? It meant they moved to a higher level of consciousness. Suddenly they became aware that God was there and was alive. It's subtle states of consciousness in the New Testament. And the New Testament subtle reveals as the divine flow of subtle awareness and the awakenings of spiritual gifts. But I learned something else. And I had an Old Testament scholar friend of mine, Jack Levinson, said to me, you know, in the Old Testament, everybody had the Spirit. Because the whole thing starts off with, in the beginning, God's Spirit, Ruach, filled us with the breath of life. As a matter of fact, Ruach, the word, means spirit and breath. And so every time you take a breath, you're breathing in spirit. My friend calls it spirit breath because it's the same thing in the Bible. And so everybody has it. Everybody who's alive and breathing and is conscious is filled with spirit breath. Everybody. Not just Christians, not just believers or Buddhists, but agnostics and atheists and everybody. Wow. Okay. And let's put that interface of God as ordinary and subtle consciousness. To finish this section, I want to go over this in 1 minute's time, okay? These 9 images, see what connects with you. We started with the traditional Trinity. We added the infinite face, it space. We added the intimate we space, the inner I space. We put the traditional Trinity in all 3 perspectives. We made a map speaking of I, infinite face of God, and we put Father as I am, infinite being. We put Jesus as the Christ, the symbol of all reality. We put Spirit as infinite consciousness. In the intimate we face of God, we put Abba, the fathering mother and presence of God, the risen Jesus as a non-physical entity, the Spirit as helper, Mary and other meaningful personal forms. We added the inner I face of God, which all is about the life energy of consciousness in biblical Christianity. Father as causal witness consciousness, Christ as non-dual consciousness, I live but not I, Christ lives within me, and Spirit as ordinary and subtle consciousness. And I called it Trinity in 3 dimensions. Okay. Now, enough of that heavy thinking. Okay. Back to our 3 faces of God. Let's simplify them. Let's just call it infinite God, intimate God, and inner God. We could call it intimate beingness, or intimate beloved, and inner beholder. The witness beholds, the inner beholder. Or we could call it God beyond, or God beside, and God within. Or we could say infinite being. God's not some big king sitting up there on some cloud in heaven. The God beyond is just infinite being itself. But God next to us, intimate God, comes to us as a being. That's not some sloppy agape amorphous mass. God as a being is It's like a mother or father or Mary or Jesus or Krishna or Buddha or whoever. Wow. Or we could call the inner God my being, your being. Isn't that wonderful? 3 different ways to think about God, all true, all partial, and we can think about God and experience God all 3 ways. Now, it's subtle questions I'd wrestled with for a long time. For instance, was God impersonal? Oh, gee, Buddha made a great case for that, First of all, Buddha didn't like to talk about God because it didn't help. It gets all complicated. But, is God just impersonal? God infinite being and not a being? Or was God personal, coming to us in personal ways? Or was God my inner essence, my unique self? All the religions and theologies I studied, each made a case for 1 or 2 of these and dismissed the others. So did every religion I looked at. So did every denomination I looked at. Baptists have a difficult time with the interface of God. Oh my gracious, tell me. Jesus may have said that we're all gods, but I don't think they take that part literally, and they're not ready to wear a t-shirt like this, okay? Actually, I don't recommend it. It might send the wrong signals, okay? Because you got to decide what the I is that you're talking about. Is that your little ego or is that your true self? But I'd consider wearing one like this. I am infinite being. What it reminds me of is Hoffat's words, when you are lonely or in darkness, I wish I could show you the astonishing light of your own being. God appears in you as you. God appears as your unique self. This is your one-of-a-kind, fullest expression of your true self. Now, on the other hand, postmoderns and integrals often have trouble with the personal, intimate face of God. It sounds too much like what they left behind if they're from a conservative or evangelical background. And along comes Integral and Ken Wilber and says, get it all together. Put it all together and you get the whole package. You get all 3 parts, all partial, all true. Get the whole picture. Now, to finish off this picture, let's add our 3 interstate practices. Reflecting about infinite God, relating to intimate God, and resting as inner God. And I call this the expanded Trinity. And let me ask you 3 questions, because this brings up the big 3 questions about God. Here they are. Let me ask you, is your God big enough? Is your God big enough? Big enough to be beyond, infinite beyond. Let me ask you this. Is your God close enough? How close to you is your God? And then let me ask you the last question. Is your God you enough? Wow. Those are 3 incredible questions. Let me ask you this. Which one are you most at home with in understanding and practice? Reflection means you like theology and philosophy. You like study, systems, maps, thinking, talking about spirituality. Relating means you have a devotional life. You pray. You experience communion with God. You sense God's presence, not just in general, but specifically in a personal way. You share your heart with God. It's meaningful to you. You listen for responses from Spirit, maybe. Resting as God is taking time to meditate, experiencing God, yourself in that vast spaciousness, God in causal formlessness or witness state, perhaps non-dual realization. And this can expand beyond meditation times into your everyday life. Let me take a poll. How many of you all experience or most comfortable or most at home with reflecting about God, with reflections? Okay? That's what us theologians love. I love that part. How many of you are most at home with relating to God? Okay. How many of you are most at home with resting as God? How interesting. That's fairly evenly divided. Well, you're full of surprises. My gracious. Okay. Let's do a brief practice to finish the integral context of friendship with Jesus. Our Catholic brothers and sisters are brilliant because they have devised a way to somatize, to get into their bodies, the traditional Trinity with the physical movements of the sign of the cross. At our church, we do a version of that in integral Christian form. We call it the threefold invocation. It's devotion in motion. 3 movements, 3 names, 3 affirmations from the New Testament. Here's how it goes. Infinite God, in whom we live and move and have our being. Intimate God, you are always with us. Inner God, we are the light of the world. You want to try it? Let's stand if you're able and willing. Okay. And let me suggest you follow the motions along. The infinite God begins like this, or some of us who are a little more Pentecostal go like this. It doesn't make a difference, okay? Here we go. Infinite God, in whom we live and move and have our being. Intimate God, you are always with us. Inner God, we are the light of the world. Now there is that version that you do for your own practice, in whom I live and move and have my being. You are always with me. By the way, that's the sign of namaste, God and others, and also the sign of prayer. And inner God, I am the light of the world. Let's try this one, okay? Infinite God, in whom I live and move and have my being. Intimate God, you are always with me. Inner God, I am the light of the world. Now that we're familiar with it, let's do it. Let's do it from our hearts and our spirits and our bodies, okay? Just join me. Infinite God, in whom I live and move and have my being. Intimate God, you are always with me. Inner God, I am the light of the world. Oh, yes, we are. Yes, we are. You may be seated. Thank you. Thank you. Yes. Whoa, God. I think I'm back in the Baptist church. This is wonderful. We got a bunch of integral Baptists here. Okay. Now, we're going to change here. We ended up with what I call the expanded Trinity, and that's the map. And then there's the territory, which is relating to God, and resting as God, which is the territory. We're going to start talking about the territory now and move to a focus on relating to God. Okay? Today's Palm Sunday. Easter's coming up. Yes. Whatever happened to Jesus' material body, the return of Jesus in his non-material body meant that his followers could continue their friendship with him, this time by means of his subtle energy field as an embodied, spiritual, physical, non-physical entity. They experienced him as real. However, Paul, the earliest recorded witness of Jesus' resurrection, was convinced Jesus' body was in spiritual form, not a physical one. In the New Testament, after Jesus was crucified, we see that Stephen, while being stoned, saw Jesus and prayed, Lord Jesus, receive my spirit. By the way, being here in Boulder, this passage takes on a whole new meaning. The teenagers, after I read this in church, they said, well, what was Stephen stoned on, you know? Is this a prayer for stoners that want to get high on Jesus too? There it is. Language changes, okay? Paul fell to the ground and heard the voice of Jesus speaking to him. Jesus appeared to Ananias in a vision and spoke to him. Paul fell into a trance, filled with images and the voice of Jesus. While praying in the temple, Paul fell into a trance and saw Jesus speaking to him. By the way, I read and studied the New Testament for years, many courses, seminary, never heard that the word trance was in the New Testament 3 times. Nobody ever talked about the early Christians having trances. Trance is another word for states of consciousness. That's what it's talking about. Early Christian prayer and worship in the temple and the homes was trance worship. Paul had visions and revelations while caught up into paradise. Down through the centuries, saints and mystics like St. Francis of Assisi and Julian of Norwich have had deep, often ecstatic relationship with Jesus in prayer. Let me mention one more context. ADCs, after-death communication. In the last 20 years, academic researchers have collected the experiences of thousands of people living today who've had after-death communication, usually with those they're close to. This seems to be one part of those subtle information fields. Here's a contemporary documented one involving two famous Christians. I'm sure you all have heard of one of them. In his little book, Ring of Truth, the English biblical scholar and translator J.B. Phillips shared a very significant event in his life that happened in 1963. I read, "The late C.S. Lewis, whom I did not know very well and had only seen in the flesh once, but whom I'd corresponded with a fair amount, gave me an unusual experience. A few days after his death, while I was watching television, he appeared, sitting in a chair within a few feet of me, and spoke a few words which were particularly relevant to the difficult circumstances through which I was passing. He was ruddier in complexion than ever, grinning all over his face, and as the old-fashioned saying has it, positively glowing with health. A week later, this time while I was in bed reading, he appeared again, even more rosily radiant than before, and repeated the same message, which was very important to me at the time. Later on, we found out the message was this: it's not as hard as you think, you know. Phillips was in the middle of a deep depression, and after he saw Lewis and heard these words, the depression lifted. It was gone. Notice the similarities to Jesus' appearances. Lewis appeared large as life and natural. He spoke. It was a transforming experience for J.B. Phillips. I'm amazed at the number of people in my former congregation as the years have gone by and they found out that I didn't think it was strange to talk to the dead. I mean, Jesus talked to Moses and Elijah, and they'd been dead for a long time. And so they found out I did the same thing, talk to guides. And so they would come to me and say, well, I've never told anybody this before, but... and they talk about an aunt or an uncle or a loved one. Wow. So with that framework, let me talk about my relationship to Jesus now. Okay? Yeah, I know it's taken a long time to get there, but I needed to set the stage so you know the framework I'm talking about it in. I began with a meager prayer life in my younger days. And as I grew, my mom read Unity literature, and she read the Unity word for the day, and I started doing that. And one day I was looking at Unity's word for the day, and I thought, how do they know what my word for the day is, you know? And I thought, I think I'll ask God if maybe God has a word for me, and if I ask, maybe I'll hear something. So I did. I heard a word back, kind of in my head. And most days, I heard a very helpful guiding word for the day. Some days it was kind of crazy. It was, the bad eggs I had for breakfast or something. I don't know. But I could learn to tell the difference. When Integral found me, I found it was time to be serious about my spiritual practice. Lord, I was hanging around a bunch of Buddhists who meditated for hours every day, and here I was with 3 minutes of prayer every morning, So I decided, blessed be the Buddhists. They got a lot to teach us Christians, and they taught me that I needed to be serious about my spiritual practices. And so I experimented with various techniques for quieting my mind. I like brainwave entrainment. I like profound meditation. And there are lots of ways to pray. This evening, I want to offer what I found to be the most transforming practice of prayer as an integral Christian. I call it studying with Jesus. This has been my practice for the last 10 years. It's a psycho-spiritual technology. It involves our psychological dimension, our spiritual dimension, and an actual practice or technology, a specific way of doing something. And it consists for me of several elements that have emerged, and I teach it to others, and it begins like this. We consent to the presence of Jesus. Those of you who do centering prayer know I borrowed that phrase from centering prayer. However, in sitting with Jesus, instead of consenting to the presence of God in general, we consent to the presence of Jesus in particular. No need for a sacred word to call us back to prayer because Jesus does that with his living presence. If I wander, I just reconnect with him. I find it easier and much more powerful to focus on Jesus that way. Writing about Spirit in second person, Wilbur says, "This great God Goddess that faces me right now, that is talking to me right now, that is revealing himself, herself to me as a companion with thou in sacred we space, is Spirit in second person mode." Which brings up an important question. Is anybody, such as Jesus, really there? I like Bill Maher. He's one of my favorite comedians. He says, Christians, well, those are the ones with the imaginary friend. Well, we got to ask, is there anybody really there when we're talking to Jesus? Well, first of all, the modern stage has diminished the reality of non-physical realms to nothing. Oh, the material's real, they say. And Ken's major contribution is restoring the importance and cruciality and the veracity of the spiritual world, the spiritual realm. The material says, the integral realm says those other realms can be real. Integral uses post-metaphysical scientific criteria to determine the validity of any experience. When we ask, is this really real or not, we have to ask these 4 questions because some things we see aren't real. 1, you experiment, you do this. 2, you experience, you observe what happens. 3, you evaluate, you compare that with others doing the same thing. And 4, you come up with evidence to conclude there is or is not evidence that what's happening is real. Millions of people, like myself, have done the experiment of experiencing the presence of Jesus for 2,000 years, and today we've reported what we experienced, we have evaluated it, we have concluded that in integral language, a cosmic groove has been deeply cut into the cosmos, and Jesus is really there. You can find out for yourself if that's really true. Let me tell you just a story from a preacher I know, Fred Craddock. He says, I've never been to the greyhound races, but I've seen them on TV. They have these beautiful big dogs, and they run like this mechanical rabbit around the ring, and these dogs just run, exhausting themselves chasing it. When those dogs get to where they can't race, the owners put a little ad in the paper, and if anybody wants one for a pet, they could have it. Otherwise, they're going to be destroyed. I have a niece in Arizona who can't stand that ad, so she goes and gets them. Big old dogs in the house. She loves them. I was in a home not long ago where they adopted a dog that had been a racer. He's a big old greyhound, spotted hound, lying there in the den. One of the kids in the family, just a toddler, lying there with his tail around there. The toddler pulling his tail. And a little older kid had his head over on the old dog's stomach, using it as a pillow. The dog just seemed so happy. And I said to that dog, are you still racing any? No, I don't race anymore. I said, well, do you miss the glitter and excitement of the track? He said, no. I said, well, what's the matter? You got too old? He said, no, I still had some race in me. Well, you didn't win? Oh, no, I made over $1 million for my owner. Well, bad treatment? Oh, no, they treated us royally when we were racing. Well, then what? Did you get crippled? No. Well, then what? And he said, I quit. You quit? Yeah, that's what he said, I quit. I said, well, why did you quit? And he said, well, one day I caught the rabbit. And I discovered that what I was chasing wasn't really a rabbit. And I quit. He looked at me and said, all that running, and what I was chasing, not even real. Jesus is real. The spiritual realm is real. It's worth pursuing. Second, how we interpret the presence of Jesus with us now is a combination of Jesus' presence and our interpretation. That's why we get so many different interpretations. It's a co-creation. So when I say Jesus is my transforming friend, it may be symbolical. It may be a symbol like, or it may be an intuitive heart-to-heart presence, Or for some, seemingly a small group, it may be visual, like Jesus' Hoffman, Christ at 33, or Playboy's Laughing Jesus back in 1970. That issue appeared there. Just friends told me about that. I didn't actually see it myself. Or one of my favorite pictures. For some people, they actually see Jesus. Or probably for most, Jesus is an unseen but clearly felt presence. For me, it's a heart-to-heart felt presence. Jesus comes to us in whatever form we need or can meaningfully recognize. We need not be concerned about the details of his appearance, but rather the dynamic of his presence. Let me tell you about Jita. Here she is in Pune, India, doing japa meditation with beads. She's well-educated, well-read. She contacted me from India one day after she read an article about me. And as we talked, she told me about her experience of attending a Christian school as a young girl. She was about ready to give her heart to Jesus one night when she woke up and saw Krishna and all of his blue-skinned glory standing at the foot of her bed. The room was flooded with love. And she gave her heart to Krishna that night. It's been a happy Hindu in the ensuing years. Wife of an airline pilot, mother of one daughter. I affirmed her decision to follow Krishna. I said, that's wonderful. You followed your experience and your heart. Good for you. A few years later, she called me and she said, I got a question for you. I said, yeah. She said, can I be both a Hindu and a Christian? I said, what's happened? And she said, last night I was reading in my study and Jesus appeared to me. She said, standing before me, radiating tremendous love. And then she spontaneously opened her heart to Jesus and gave her heart to Jesus. Hence her question. I told her one of my favorite theologians, Ramon Panikar, was a Hindu and a Buddhist without ceasing to be a Christian. I said, I don't see why you can't be a Christian without ever ceasing to be a Hindu. She now lives as a happy Christian Hindu. I tell you about her to point out the power of the presence of God in the form of beloved deity with whom we connect heart to heart. And that's the second ingredient in sitting with Jesus. Crossing the devotional threshold. Integral Life Practice by Wilber and Company devotes an entire section to devotional practice. You ought to read it. It's wonderful. It says, one cannot just sit down and do devotion mechanically the way you do push-ups. A threshold must be crossed to do devotion authentically. You must fall in love with existence itself, which could mean God, Spirit, the source of grace. Transrational devotion often informs that embrace the traditions is a natural expression of maturity and integral practice. Nothing happens in sitting with Jesus without moving into your heart and making a devotional connection to Jesus. Sometimes that's hard. And I have a question you can ask yourself if that's hard. I ask it to myself when I move into a slough of doubt or when I'm just sort of down. And this is the question I ask myself. What would I feel if Jesus was really here with me? This usually gets me in touch with Jesus really being there. And then one of four things or all four things can happen. You can simply sit quietly in awareness. Somebody who had created in prayer for meditation said to me one time, prayer is just too busy. Too much noise, too much talking, too much asking and begging and pleading. And I said, well, don't pray that way. And he looked at me and said, well, then what do you do? Well, I shared it with him what I'm sharing with you now. You sit quietly in mutual awareness. You just sit there. That's what good friends do. They can sit together and enjoy one another's company. You sense one another's loving presence. You soak up the love and history together. All the things you've been through together. That's real sitting with Jesus' prayer. You're aware of Jesus' presence. You're aware that He's aware of you. He knows you're there. And you know He's there. But humans communicate too, so you communicate back and forth. Sometimes we think prayer is just talking to God, but no, it's a communication. And God will respond in images and words, various ways, intuitions. I try to stay aware of words and things that come into my mind. And a number of years ago, I began having visions. Just amazed to things started appearing right in front of me. First of all, it was stars, and then there were intricate lines and colorful geometric patterns, and they began moving. And I thought, what in the world is this? What am I getting ready to be a mathematician or something? What is this? It was really strange. And then I began to see colorful geometric patterns, which evolved in luminous white and gold waves of color that still occur whenever I'm in prayer mode. I just wait a while, and suddenly the color fireworks start happening. It's not uncommon at all in subtle state. And later, then there appeared to be, my eyes open or closed, images of people, nature, buildings, objects just whizzing by me from all around the world. Sometimes I could only tell if an object was physically present or non-physically present in subtle state by putting my hand out. My hand went through, then I figured it wasn't there in the material realm. But here's what was so neat. Because I asked myself, I thought, I'm going crazy. This is weird. This is strange. And not only that, it's not spiritual. How come I'm not seeing Jesus? That would make it spiritual. I'm seeing all these things, people and stars and stuff. And what I discovered, it was preparing me for the disillusion of out there and in here into one space. One space. Back to talking with Jesus, and I'll tell you more about that. For years when I was talking with Jesus, it seemed like he was a presence and not a visible form, standing several feet in front of me and away. And one day I said, can't you come closer to me? And suddenly he was an inch from my face. And I said, not that close. And he laughed, and he moved over to my side. He said, is this okay? And I said, oh yeah, that's fine. And then he touched my arm, and I felt his touch. And it has remained with me for 5 years. I can feel his touch right now. I feel it constantly. I feel him touching me. Now, I just say that to say, not that that needs to happen to you. Other things happen to other people. It varies. But God has experiences for all of us that fit what we needed. I needed to be touched. I needed to be touched. You can rest as infinite being. When my time relating to Jesus seems to end, I move then into meditation. I move from praying to meditating. And this way is opened up because of these experiences and awakenings. And then I began to experience those formless experiences and witnessing and so on. And now I notice we've changed from relating to God to resting as God. I was giving a workshop in Santa Barbara years ago, and several years ago, and for years I've struggled with agoraphobia. I didn't travel because I panicked. I would get away from home and start having panic attacks and run up a $200 phone bill with my therapist and downing Xanax and everything, and so I stopped traveling. And so I decided I had enough healing, and I took this trip to Santa Barbara, and I was laying in bed in my hotel room looking out at the beautiful Pacific Ocean. And the question on my mind was, would I panic? And would the headlines read, Christian speaker on Christianity has panic attack and had to go back home. So, and suddenly, I was aware I was in Santa Barbara, and it blew my mind. Instead of being in Santa Barbara was in me. It was in me. And that experience expanded in the coming weeks and months, till finally at times the whole universe is inside me. That blows my mind. It blows my heart. Those experiences are available for us all, and of course are common among those who meditate. One last step, we can learn to identify with Jesus. Putting on the mind of Christ is the loving dissolution of all boundaries and separateness in the kingdom of God, the non-dual kingdom of God. I knew there was more. I knew there was more. I did not know how to move into that thing Ken talked about, where you look at the mountain and you are the mountain. I read that. I mean, I've read all of his books many, many times, and I'd come to those parts and I'd say, that's really nuts. you know, I, I don't know how that works. And then I heard Ken talking about non-duality as a 3-2-1 process. I'm getting to the end now, okay? Yeah, you become all things arising. And I thought, 3-2-1, I know how to do that. I was in Gestalt therapy for 5 years, 2-2 chair work, and then I do shadow work 3-2-1 in my head now, where you talk to something, you talk about it, and then you relate to it, and then you become it. And so I thought, what if I did that with Jesus? I mean, I talked a lot about him. I talked to him when I was praying. What if I did shadow work 3-2-1 with Jesus? And I did. I visualized him. He was here touching me, but I visualized him in front of me. I saw the two of us moving toward each other. We touched. We melted. And suddenly, I was looking at the world through his eyes. It was like his head was in me, but his heart was in me. It was just something. I began seriously and a little bit entering the unity non-world of unity consciousness. I was putting on the mind of Christ. So my last suggestion is practicing 3-2-1 shadow work with the presence of Jesus is the way to move into that non-dual consciousness that I believe is an easy, open pathway for anybody who sits with Jesus. Jesus brings love into every integral equation, dissolves all boundaries and all separations. Jesus is non-dual love in sandals. To identify with him is to identify with an actual loving person who sees the world in non-dual awareness. This is the most powerful kind of identification we can make because it's already present as who we really are. Merging with Jesus awakens that reality in us. My last picture and point. After I'd been doing this for a while, I was reading the Gospel of Thomas. I love the Gospel of Thomas. I had the 114 verses printed up, told my congregation to put it right in their Bibles right before Matthew because it was written before any of the other books in the Bible. And I was reading this in the Gospel of Thomas, and Jesus was talking to his close friends and his companions. And he vividly describes what he's offering. He says this. He says, "Whoever drinks from my mouth will become like me, and I will become like that one, and what is hidden will be revealed." And I thought, that's what's happening to me. I'm drinking from the mouth of Jesus, and we're becoming alike. I thought, boy, that sounds boastful. But it seemed like in some small way that was really happening. And I realized Jesus is saying that same thing to all of us today. Whoever drinks from my mouth will become like me, and I will become like that one, and what is hidden will be revealed.